Hey everybody, Donkey Storm here. Today we're going to make a tier list for the best PUG tanks in Shadowlands. And I think before we jump into the tier list, we're going to define what we mean by PUG and also set some criteria. What are we looking for in a PUG tank? So when I say PUG, I mean a group of people that don't know each other. Or if they do know each other, it's very uncoordinated, just kind of, 5 guildies all thrown together in a dungeon. Nothing's pre-planned. And I think for the purposes of this video, we can say that we're going to define PUG for us as like keys between 10 and 22. I think anything below 10 doesn't matter what you're playing, and above 22 is about where we see kind of PUGs stop for the most part. I think that 21, 22 range is usually about where you don't really see many PUGs anymore. So that's how we're going to define PUG. Now, what are we looking for in a PUG tank? So I've set up 3 things that I think PUG tanks should have. First and foremost, survivability. More so than anything in a PUG, I want a tank that's not going to fall over. If I'm playing a tank in a PUG, it's nice to be very tanky. It's nice to have a lot of control over my own health pool. So self-sustain, also important. The second thing is going to be utility. Specifically, what tools do you have to deal with the various affixes and dangerous situations you get put in a Mythic Plus dungeon? And then thirdly, damage. Do you contribute damage to your group? And to what extent? And that is going to be the order of priority. So we have survivability, utility, then damage. So let's get into it. We'll start with the S tier. No surprise here if you watch any of my other videos, but I'm going to put Guardian Druid at the top of the S tier because it has all those things that I mentioned. Guardian Druid is very tanky. Guardian Druid has a lot of control over their own hit points. You've got Frenzied Regen, you've got Renewal, and then you've got the ultimate trump card, Incarn, plus the Ursoc's Fury Remembered Legendary. You have 30 seconds of invulnerability, anti-damage, every 3 minutes, which allows you to pull really big. It also covers up a lot of mistakes, and room for error is definitely something we want in our PUG tanks. Now, let's talk about utility. Druids are usually the kings of utility. You've got Incarn to deal with Necrotic. You can kite with Typhoon. You're usually Night Fae, so you've got a Blink. You've got Typhoon for Sanguine. You've got a Soothe. You've got a Root. You've got Mass Root. You've just got so many tools in your toolkit. You really have a lot that you can do to deal with the various affixes. And then finally for damage, Druid is sort of middling in the damage department. Single target is not so hot. AoE, when you've got Incarn rolling, is pretty solid, but sort of middle of the pack, not blowing anybody away with the damage. But in my opinion, the tankiness and Incarn is going to put Druid in the S tier. So my next tank is going to be in the A tier, and that is going to be Brewmaster Monk. For many of the same reasons that I feel Druid is good. Brewmaster, very tanky. The nature in which they take damage makes them easy to heal. They have lots of utility, probably about the same as Druids, honestly. They can do some really cool things with Ring of Peace. You have definitely really good mobility. You can kite whenever you need to. And I would say from a damage perspective, they're actually probably a little bit stronger than Druid. So the only thing really that's keeping them from being on the S tier, the difference here between these two tanks is going to be Incarn. But Monks are super, super solid tanks as well, and they're going to be alone in the A tier, in my opinion. Next, we have the B tier, and this is where I'm going to put all the rest of the tanks. And I struggle a bit with these 4. If you had asked me a couple months ago, it would have been different, but I'm going to put Protection Paladin at the front of the B tier. We see a lot of success from Protection Paladins recently, especially at very high levels, but I think the stigma around protection paladins used to be that they're not very tanky. I think that's a little bit overstated. I don't think protection paladins are as squishy as they're made out to be, and they do have some self-sustain as well. They've got lay on hands. And I've found them when I'm playing my healers generally not too hard to heal. They're definitely not as tanky as these first two, but they're not as bad as some people make them out to be. Utility-wise, again, they're probably not quite up there with the bear and the monk, but they have some nice tricks in their toolkit. They've got an immunity, they've got freedom, they've got tons of ways to interrupt things. Like, everything's going to get kicked when you're running a protection paladin. So strong there, and then damage is where protection paladins really excel. They're probably the highest damage tank. If you run with a good protection paladin, they'll be challenging some of your DPS. It's pretty impressive. So protection paladin is going to be at the top of the B tier. And then we're going to follow it up now. This is where these three I really have a hard time differentiating from. So I'm going to draw off a personal experience here. And I'm going to put warrior next. To me, warrior is just sort of a jack of all trades tank. They're reasonably tanky. Their damage is pretty strong. Utility may be lacking a little bit, but they're not really the best at anything, but they're not bad at anything either. So warriors are very good at mitigating physical damage. So they are a pretty tanky tank. Utility is probably their biggest weakness. Warriors don't have a ton to deal with the various affixes in the same way that like a monk or a druid does. And they're also going to lose points here a little bit for not having really any self-healing, which as a tank and a pug is nice if maybe you don't have the strongest healer or you're not on the same page as your healer. But they also have pretty solid damage. So warrior just kind of a all-around solid tank. This next one is tough. Again, I'm going to draw off my own personal experiences here. I am going to put Death Knight next. So, why Death Knight? Death Knights are a very high skill ceiling tank. A good Blood Death Knight is extremely tanky. They have ridiculous self-sustain. But when we're talking about a pug tank, you never know what you're going to get. We're not making this tier list for, all tanks played at the most optimal level. So it's a little bit hard to put Blood any higher than this. But Blood Death Knights are really good tanks. The self-sustain is really awesome. If you're ever healing a Blood Death Knight and you just, want to do an experiment, stop healing them for a little bit and watch what happens. They will pretty much top themselves up. Blood Death Knights don't need a lot of healing. Even though you see the health bars spike a little bit, they are very tanky. From a utility perspective, they have some cool things they can do with Death Grip, Gorfine's Grasp. Control Undead can do some pretty cool stuff, especially in Theater of Pain. They are notoriously slow, so they're not great at escaping, kiting. They definitely have an Achilles heel with the necrotic affix being kind of particularly tough on them. So for those, and also low damage. The Blood Death Knight is probably the lowest damage tank, as far as I know. So those things are what's going to keep Blood on kind of the lower end of my tier list. Still a solid tank, very viable at all levels, but from my experience in Pugs, I'm going to put them toward the bottom. And then this might be a little bit of an unpopular decision, but Demon Hunter is going to come in last. I know Demon Hunters can do some super cool things. I do watch the MDI, and I know a lot of Demon Hunters get play. I'm not saying they're bad, but I think from a Pug perspective, Demon Hunters don't bring me what I want. Demon Hunters have moments of very high survivability. They also have moments of very low survivability. This is another high skill ceiling tank. Demon Hunters need to be good at kiting. Demon Hunters have good utility with things like their sigils. They need to know how to use those things correctly because they don't have the same kind of margin for error that a bear tank has. And to me, that's paramount in Mythic Plus. So because of these long moments with no active mitigation and the need for quite a bit of skill coming from this tank, I'm going to put them at the bottom. This is a lot drawing from my own personal experience, like playing healers. I tend to find Demon Hunter tanks to be some of the most difficult to keep up. Now, they do make up for this in other ways, though. Demon Hunters do a lot of damage. And in fact, I think because of that, I'm actually going to make a little switch here. Can I? Yeah. We're going to move Demon Hunter above Blood Death Knight. I talked myself into it. Mainly because of the extra damage that they provide. Demon Hunters are very high damage tanks. It's just that lack of survivability that scares me a little bit when healing a Demon Hunter. Okay, so this is my tier list for tanks for Pug Mythic Plus. And I also want to just kind of make as a caveat, the difference between like our S tier and the bottom of our B tier here is not really that great. I think all tanks are very viable. I think tank balance is super strong right now. So if you're watching this video and maybe thinking of making a tank alt, and this is going to influence you in any way, I would just say play what you want. Just be aware of the strength and weaknesses of each class and play one that's going to fit your style. So do you want to be more of a glass cannon? Do you want to be more of the sturdy, lower damage tank? You know, they're all here and they're all good. But this is just my opinion, so I'd love to know what you think. Let me know in the comments. What changes would you make to this? Do you agree or disagree with any of this stuff? And would you want to see another tier list for healers, range DPS, melee DPS? We'll see down the line if we want to do any more of these. So anyway, thank you for watching. If you like what you saw, please like, subscribe, and I will see you next time.